Why do handmade things feel a little bit more significant than they used to? Not necessarily more valuable in a financial sense, but maybe more meaningful and prestigious. I don't particularly think it's just a renewed interest in crafts or a trend towards slow making. Although since the pandemic, it could be argued otherwise. But like everything, I think it's because of the conditions that we are now living and making in. We are surrounded by objects that are increasingly mass-produced, standardized, and designed to be replaceable. But more than that, things are not just produced, they are generated. Products, images, texts, everything can now be created instantly and without a clear maker behind them. On the point of the invisibility of labor, on The Problem with Craft video, a viewer rightly pointed out that although most shop-bought clothes are made on industrial machines, they are still hand-guided and hand-finished by real people earning pennies to do so. This is not something that we often talk about or think about, nor is it what we romanticize as handmade. And I'm certainly not trying to argue that shop-bought clothes are handmade, but I am trying to illustrate the point that there is a clear distinction in our minds, in our collective minds, between a maker in a developing country slaving over our Zara blouses and something like a hand-thrown mug or a hand-knit jumper. Objects that we readily describe as handmade because the labor is very much visible to us. But in both cases, hands are involved. It's just that one kind of labor is hidden and the other is something that we are encouraged to notice or even revere. One thing that handmade objects seem to insist of is the presence of a maker. You can even see it in the objects, in the unevenness, in the small decisions taken, and in the traces of how something came into being. And that's quite a difference between that and something that feels seamless, machine finished or computer generated. But I think there's something about that visible presence that still seems very important to us. Another thing that I keep coming back to is the idea of authorship. With handmade work, there's usually a clear sign of the maker of who made the object, how it was made, and why certain decisions were made. And I think that uncertainty of who made the artwork or who made the object much more significant when the authorship is visible. Not really in a romantic, abstract sense, but as something that anchors the object to a person. And sometimes when that labor is invisible, we stop looking for a maker, for the person, and only focus on the object that has been generated. We start only to look at the result. The object therefore becomes something only to consume rather than something to interpret as being the outcome of a process. If you take a piece of music and separate it from the artist, from their voice, their experience, the context in which it was made, the work becomes harder to place. Even if the composition remains the same, the basis for interpretation becomes less clear. And when a piece of music is covered by another artist, it doesn't exist independently either. It carries a layering of interpretations shaped by both the original and the present voice. But in both cases, the presence of an author is still apparent. The work can still be traced back to someone, to a set of decisions, a way of seeing, and a way of making. And that's why I think authorship is important when it is visible. Again, not as this abstract idea, but as something to help us understand what we are looking at and the context of which it was made. Then, of course, there's the question of effort. Historically, effort has often been tied to value. Time spent, skills developed, and labor involved. It's like the difference between a Rolls Royce and a Kia. But that relationship is becoming less overt. You can now produce something that might appear highly complex and refined with relatively little effort involved beyond a simple prompt. But when something handmade makes that effort visible once again, when you see the time, the skills, the repetition, the effort that has been put into things, that feels different. I've noticed that when I pick up something handmade, I tend to handle it slightly differently. I turn it over, I look more closely, not necessarily because I understand how it was made, but because I'm aware that it was made, that there was a process behind it, even if I can't fully see that. And I think that awareness changes the pace of attention. You spend a little longer with the object, not always consciously, but in a way that feels different from most other objects. There's also a verbal distinction that we like to make between the words handmade and homemade. I mean, they both describe things made by hand, but we often don't treat the words the same. Handmade is something we tend to value. It suggests care, skill, intention, whereas homemade feels a little bit more casual, less refined, sometimes even slightly apologetic, like we didn't have the money to buy something from the store, so we made it homemade. I think that difference is quite interesting because the labor behind the objects isn't necessarily different. It's not like we would think, okay, I put more effort into something that is handmade and less effort into something that is homemade. But homemade still has that connotation of making do. So it is also how labor is framed, whether it's presented as something to be admired or something run-of-the-mill, ordinary. And I think that framing shapes how we assign an object's value just as much as the work itself. Our renewed interest and reverence in the handmade may also sit alongside a broader reaction to overconsumption. We are currently very much used to constant novelty, rapid turnover, and things being easily replaced, whereas handmade objects tend to encourage slower acquisition, longer use, and more emotional attachment. Not always, of course, but often. And that shift in pace can also contribute why we think handmade things are more important. But I don't think this shift is entirely that straightforward, because at the same time as handmade becoming more valued, it's also becoming more visible as content. We watch people make things, we consume their processes, and increasingly even the appearance of something that is handmade can be easily replicated or generated without, of course, the same labor processes behind it. So there is a question of, when we view something that appears handmade, what exactly are we responding to? Is it the object itself, the process behind it, or just the aesthetic of making? I don't think handmade objects feel more important right now because the process is slower or even more sustainable or even inherently more meaningful. I think it feels more important because it makes labor seem more visible. And that labor is something that is becoming more and more obscure. The presence of a maker, the passage of time, and the labor involved, the fact that something has been worked on rather than generated. And I don't think any of these things inherently make handmade better, but I do think it may change how we experience objects, experience the world around us. and maybe why it feels more significant now than maybe it was considered before. Thank you for watching. Please let me know in the comments what you think. Do you actively seek out handmade objects for your home, or do you not really care about that kind of thing? I will see you in the next one. Bye. Before you go, just a quick reminder that I will be uploading a bit more experimental alter ego animation, stop motion, etc things on my Ko-fi. I experiment, find my style, but regularly go over there and check it out. Bye.